I am super excited for this video because it has been a long time, I mean months. I don't know how many exactly, but it has been at least a few months since we have done any kind of officer tier list video. But seeing as we have recently had a new officer added to the lineup, and I think we have had a couple of new tank officers specifically added to the game since I did my last tier list video, we are going to be doing a tank specific officer tier list. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in and get started. Welcome back. I hope you are all doing wonderful. I hope life is going well for each and every one of you. Again, I'm super excited to do an updated tier list video. This is going to be a tank officer specific tier list. Again, as we've had some new officers added to Warpath since I did my last tank officer tier list. But before we get going, if you guys enjoy these tier list videos and want to see more updated ones as we move forward, maybe an artillery specific one, maybe an infantry officer specific one, or just a broad overall tier list video in general. Again, if you guys like these types of videos, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel if you are not already so you don't miss any future uploads. Let's try to get this video to at least 175 likes. Now let's go ahead and jump into the tier list maker and see what we've got. All right, guys, we are now in the tier list, and from the past tier list videos, if you have seen them before, you guys know how I roll when it comes to tier list videos specifically. I like to generally stay away from the exclusive lounge officers simply because most players do not have more than one, maybe if they've invested some money, two exclusive lounge officers unlocked and fully awakened. Now, of course, there are quite a few players that do invest a lot of money into the lounge specifically, and so they have multiple, if not all, of the exclusive lounge officers fully awakened. But again, these videos are geared towards the entire community. So what I have done, I've taken that a step further just to kind of remain organized, but also to give you guys my thoughts and opinions on all of the officers, including the exclusive lounge. I've broke them into two categories. I've got a free-to-play category, as well as underneath that, the four tank-specific exclusive lounge officers. So what we're going to do is we are going to go in and place all of the free-to-play tank officers first, and then at the end we will come in and we will address the exclusive lounge-specific tank officers. And then, as always, just to put this out on the front end, of course, I have got some officers in here that aren't like tagged tank-specific officers, but more versatile officers that generally get utilized on a tank in some form or fashion. And now some of this is just opinion based. This is from what I have gathered and seen from talking to different people in the community, and then also, of course, just watching fights myself, mainly in regard to the exclusive lounge officers. Some of them I don't have, and I've never actually personally used them in a real combat environment, so I don't know how they have performed. Again, just kind of going off what I've been told and what I have been seeing there. So I just want to make sure to air it all out and be as transparent as possible. But for most of these officers, I have used them and have some kind of experience with them in some capacity. So starting with number one, I've tried to order these in chronological order based on the generation of officer that they actually are. So starting with generation 1, then going to 2, then 3, and 4. So I don't know if I got it 100% perfect and correct, but I tried to do the best I can off of memory. So starting with Spanner, no secret here. He's a good officer. He's nothing that is going to blow the doors off, especially mid and late game. He's a good early game officer, especially if you are a player that intends on doing a base-to-base style of fighting and you need a tanking/healing officer. Sergeant Spanner is going to be a good option for you there. He's also got I believe it's his second or third skill, which is an offensive skill, which increases the damage to fortifications by 25%. You can put that skill on an artillery unit, for example, in the mid and later stages of the game and get some value out of him there. But seeing as he is not that relevant, again, mid and late game, he is going to be a C tier officer from me. Next up, we have my man War Machine. This is the man that is just, you've heard me say it a gazillion times. He has survived the test of time. He is one of the most underrated officers, probably in Warpath. Honestly, he's a versatile officer. And when we talk about versatility, he is quite literally the prime example of versatility. He's good on literally any unit type, but he also has a lot of value through the officer skill training system. For those reasons alone, regardless of whatever you use him on, even though this is a tank specific video, he's still going to be an A tier officer for me. Now, one thing I should have done on the front end of the video that I didn't, and I'm going to do really quick, is walk you through the actual tiers. So obviously the bottom two where I've got the tank officers listed out, that's not a tier at all. That's just where I organized them at. But S, A, B, C, and D are the tiers we are working with. S is going to be the top of the line, the must-have, the priority officers. A are really good lead officers, fantastic secondary officers, depending on the other officers you've got. And while they are not as like must-have important as S-tier officers, they are still at the very top of the food chain and officers that you do not want to neglect or not, you know, you don't want to go without them. B tier are generally going to be your kind of top of the line secondary officers, your support role officers. If you've especially got a unique setup where you're running 3, 4, maybe even 5 tanks, that's where these officers are going to come into play. If you've got a 5 tank or a 4 tank setup like that, maybe you look at having some B tier officers slide into like a lead officer role. But again, generally speaking, they're going to be really good secondary officers. C tier are officers that are okay in a certain stage of the game, primarily early stage, maybe some middle stages of the game, and then also going to be some value through them with the officer skill training system. And then the D tier is going to be just don't stay away from them just in general. So next up, we have got Death Adder, again, another Generation 1 officer. He is tagged as a versatile officer, but we definitely all know at this point that he is a tank officer. He has got basically no value. He's okay on a tank in the very early stages of the game. So, you know, if you're using him and you're in that stage of the game, you're fine. As you get into the middle and late stages of the game, he's definitely going to fall off. The one piece of value that he is going to provide you is his second skill that you can use for the officer skill system, which is going to be a plus 15% damage intensity. So other than that, he's going to be a hard like D category don't officer, but because he does have that one skill that you can rob for the skill training system, I'm going to throw him into the C category, but he's generally not an officer that you want to really invest much of anything into. Same thing, we've got Bloody Mary, again, Generation 1 officer, really little to no value, even in the early stages of the game now. I would suggest saving your statues for Generation 2, 3, and 4 officers. Similar to Death Adder, she's going to have a little bit of value through the officer skill training system. She is also going to offer you a plus 15% damage intensity. So that slides her into the C category. But other than that, don't invest in her. She's pretty much a hard do not worry about officer. Now, Percy, I put Percy on here again. She's a versatile officer. I've seen her get utilized a little bit on infantry, actually, in the mid to later stages of the game. In the early game, the only reason that I've even included her on this list is because she is the easiest and fastest officer to fully awaken. I've actually got videos specifically about Percy, so if you have not seen those and you are a new player in Warpath, I would definitely encourage you to check those out. But she really is only going to hold a little bit of value right at the beginning stages of the game, just because, again, you can awaken her so quickly. After that, she's going to do a decent enough job if you do decide to run an infantry unit. If you don't decide to run an infantry unit, then she's pretty much a hard pass. Next up is going to be Winter Huntsman. He is, again, early stage officer. He used to be only able to be acquired through playing and participating in the Moscow Theater of Conquest event specifically. That has, of course, since changed. We've discussed that before. Really doesn't hold. He's got a higher damage coefficient for a Generation 1 officer. He is definitely at the top of the food chain for damage coefficient for Generation 1 specifically. He's also got the unique ability to freeze units, but again, that is a tactical skill, so that cannot be used via the officer skill system, and he does not have enough value just as a standalone officer to use him on one of your main units. But he does have a balanced skill that increases firepower and HP, so for that reason you can utilize it through the officer skill training system, so he at least gets a little bit of value there. Next up is going to be Guardian of Truth, the OG pay-to-win officer in Warpath. He is been around forever. He is essentially the OG version of an exclusive lounge officer, except a lot cheaper, and by a lot cheaper, I mean like a couple $1,000s cheaper. I've got him awakened. I don't know how much. It's been so long. I don't know exactly how much it costs to get him. I think, again, you guys have heard me say this before. I think it's in the ballpark of like $300, maybe $400 total. Maybe I'm off on that, but I think that gets me pretty close. If I was to start playing Warpath today and I had, or let's say I was going to restart a new account knowing what I know now, would I fully awaken Guardian of Truth? And the answer is no. He does not hold enough value long term. However, if you are a player that does want to invest money and has the ability to, now just to make sure I cover my bases, I'm not encouraging anybody to spend money. If you have it and you want to, great. If you don't and you can't, great. Completely up to you individually. But if you do intend to spend and you want to get an early game advantage, especially when it comes to your tank units, Guardian of Truth is definitely a way to do that. He is going to give you a ton of value in the early game if he is fully awakened, but that's pretty much where the buck stops. Once you get into the mid and late stages of the game, he is largely irrelevant or obsolete. He gets definitely overshadowed by the generation, especially 3 and 4 officers, but he does have some quality value through the officer skill training system. And in the event that you run, 4 or 5 tanks, then you could probably utilize him in some form or fashion if that is your specific case scenario. For most of you, it is not, so I am going to slide him into the B tier there. Again, just keep in mind that he's only really going to be relevant to you if you run a super unique setup 4 or 5 tanks in the mid and late stages of the game. Next up is going to be Steel Fighter. She is definitely, she doesn't seem like she's been in the game for that long, but she's been in the game for a long time. She used to be a lot more popular, especially for your tanking units, think like super heavy. She's also started to garner a little bit of popularity with infantry units, specifically because of her shield ability. But she has definitely fallen off a little bit in terms of value, just because she's been overshadowed by some newer officers, think like Svelin, for example, and Uncle Ivankov, for example. And also, Thorn Countess has kind of hung around a little bit and maintained her value a little bit more so than Steel Fighter, simply because Thorn Countess has some offensive capability that Steel Fighter does not. But Steel Fighter also offers some value for your base on base defense. So if that is your deal, then you can definitely consider throwing her on and getting the value out of her for your base defensive situations. So for that reason, I'm going to throw her into the B tier of officers. I just don't see enough value there to make her an A tier officer. Maybe I'm going to get a little backlash for that, but she does offer some solid value again on base defense, but that's just one aspect of the game, and I'm not seeing enough value there to give her a A rating. Of course, if you disagree with me though, which there always is somebody that disagrees with me for whatever reason, feel free to let me know in the comments. Next up is going to be a very interesting officer. This is Tiger Marauder. If you are newer to Warpath, then you have had access to Tiger Marauder for quite some time now, or at least since the beginning of your Warpath experience. For all of us that were or are like kind of long-term or long-time players of Warpath, Tiger Marauder was an interesting one because he got added pretty much out of nowhere. There was no reference of him on the PTR server. There was no reference of him on the test server. Like literally he came out of nowhere and everybody was kind of thrown off guard. And he is pretty much just a regurgitated version of a couple of these other officers, think like Winter Huntsman and Sergeant Spanner. He offers nothing of really much value. The only thing that makes him somewhat of a conversation is the fact that his first skill, his tactical skill, is at the top of the food chain for damage coefficient for Generation 1 officers. But in order to get that high damage coefficient, you have to fully awaken him. And that's a complete, and I mean a complete waste of your statues. You're going to invest in 3 skills, his 3 passive skills, which are going to be completely useless to you in the mid and late stages of the game, just to get a high-end Generation 1 officer that, when you're talking about Generation 3 and 4 officers specifically, his damage coefficient is a non-starter anyway. So for that reason, I'm going to throw him into the D tier of officers there. Now, WarriorWhiz is, again, another Generation 1 officer. Surprisingly, he has not been in the game that long. But him and Bomb Princess, which is who's going to be next on our list that we're going to talk about, they were added through the limited time collaboration event we had. Gosh, I don't know, maybe a month, or not a month, sorry, maybe about a year ago-ish. I don't know exactly how long it's been, but they were added through that limited time collaboration event, and they do okay. They've got a high damage coefficient. They've got some value through the skill training system, so for that reason, I'm going to throw them into the B tier. Same thing, Bomb Princess. She is actually kind of partnered up with WarriorWhiz in the sense that some of her skills rely on his skills, and they kind of complement each other and actually increase some of the value through their skills. But again, in order to get that value, you have to have them kind of together. There's a little bit of loophole for that, but not going to discuss that in this video. But through the skill training system, you can kind of circumvent that. However, she's got some value, again, via the skill training system, and she offers a little bit of unique stuff, but other than that, she's a B tier officer. You can use her, again, if you've got a multi-tank setup, if you've got something really unique going on, consider them. But other than that, I wouldn't worry too much about it. Thorn Countess is another big one. She pairs really well with Svelin, who we are going to talk about in a minute. Pretty much the kind of, or for the most part, for most players, the kind of go-to combination for super heavies and tanking units for survivability. She's also got a lot of value through her passive skills if you want to utilize her for the officer skill training system. She is only one of a handful of officers that offer a skill that is going to increase your unit's damage intensity by 20%. Plus, similar to Steel Fighter, she also offers some value in her shield capabilities. So because of her versatility, she is going to get the nod as an A tier officer from me. Next up is going to be Lady Justice. Now, Lady Justice is an officer that I have personally never fully invested in. I've got one of her skills to level 5 that I use for the skill training system. Other than that, I have never fully invested in her, but she is a good officer. She offers a solid damage coefficient. She offers good passive skills, again, that you can use for the skill training system. And if you are a player that runs, maybe like 2 light tanks or 3 light tanks, because I've seen that become more and more common, then she's definitely going to have a place in your lineup. If you're running 1, maybe 2 tanks, then she's probably not going to be an officer that you want to go too heavy in. But you could honestly plug her in and play with her on any tank unit, and you're still going to get value. It's not going to be anything that's going to blow the doors off, so to speak, or light the world on fire, but she still does do a decent job of retaining some value. So I'm going to throw her into the A tier there just because you can still use her, and she's a very viable officer. She's not the most popular officer in Warpath by any means, and I don't think she ever has been. Honestly, I think she's probably a little bit of an underrated officer, but I think there's still enough value there to consider her an A-tier officer. Now, Svelin is an interesting one. Svelin came into the game, and he has been kind of the go-to, or one of the go-to officers now for your tanking units. Think super heavies, or in some people's case, a main battle tank. But he does a phenomenal job soaking up damage, like the best job of any officer, at least currently in Warpath. He's got a bunch of value if you do want to use his skills for the officer skill training system. Let's say you don't have a tanking unit or a unit that you intend on using as a tanking unit. He may not be your go-to at that point, but you can still get a huge amount of value out of him through the skill training system. But because he does offer his ability as a tanking officer that is just night and day at the top of the mountain, he's the lead officer in that category. For that reason, this isn't going to be for everybody, but just generally speaking, because he is leading in that category, and there are a lot of players that do have tanking units, he's going to get an S tier nod from me. You could make a case, you could definitely make a valid case for him as an A tier. He's going to get the nod just because in his specific role, he is the best of the best, at least as of this moment. Whipcracker is another officer that's kind of flown largely under the radar. She's got some value through the skill training system. She does okay if you run multiple units, multiple tank units, that is. You can get some value out of her. She, again, is not going to be anything that, sets the world on fire. And she's also not going to be the top end of officers in really any category. But overall, she's a pretty viable officer. So she's going to get a nod as... It's tough. I'm going to go A tier. I wouldn't be upset if somebody said that they view her as a B tier officer. And you could definitely make a valid case for that. So I'm gonna lock her in as an A tier officer just because she does offer some value through the skill training system that you're not going to get from necessarily some of these other officers per se, but she's definitely not an S tier. Next up, we've got Valkyrie. Now, Valkyrie is a Generation 3 officer. She's been in the game for a little while now, but she is primarily geared towards helicopters, and seeing as the helicopter meta has come and gone in Warpath, at least for right now, the light tanks have become a lot more popular. Main battle tanks have become more popular in recent time. She's still a very good tank officer. She just gets a little bit of additional value if paired on a helicopter specifically, but really great value through the skill training system as well. She's pretty much a no doubt A tier officer. Next up, we've got Golden Eagle, and other than having War Machine in the conversation, Golden Eagle definitely is going to be arguably the most versatile officer in the game. He makes sense on any kind of tank unit you put him on. He can also be a viable option on an anti-tank gun. And he also can be a good option on an infantry, specifically a Vanguard infantry. So he really does have some versatility there, but he offers a ton of value on tanks as well. And for that matter, on any tank unit you want to put him on. So for that reason, he's going to get the nod as an S tier officer. He's got just an incredible amount of value there. Next up is going to be Vox. Now, Vox is, again, truly a versatile officer, but not necessarily in the right kind of way. Not because she's got a ton of value for all different unit types. She's more of a versatile officer because there's really nowhere clearly to put her. She's got some value in terms of base defense, kind of like Steel Fighter and some of these other officers. But outside of base defense, she doesn't have enough value to be really in the consideration or in the conversation for any unit, especially not a tank unit. You can definitely get some value out of her through her skill training system, but she's kind of in limbo, and she always has been. You don't want her in your lineup, but you don't want to not have her in your lineup simply because of the value she's going to give your base. So for that reason, I'm gonna put her into the B tier of officers there. Now, next up is Rapier. I'm sure I've been saying that wrong forever since he's been in the game, but it is what it is at this point. He is a monster on tanks. He's also going to get a little bit of additional value if put on a light tank specifically. Not going to go into too much detail simply because he and his reputation speak for himself. He's going to get the nod as an S tier officer from me. And then these next two officers are going to be the newest Generation 4 additions to Warpath. The first one being Uncle Ivankov. He is really good. He offers you some value on base defense and base HP recovery. He also offers you some value in terms of your tanking units. Think like pairing him with Svelin. That's a really, really good option. But again, his skills and his value kind of speak for themselves. He's going to get the nod as an S tier officer. And then last but not least on our free-to-play officer list here, we have got Madam Havoc. She is the newest addition. She has been in the game roughly 2 weeks now, so she is still brand new. I have personally awakened her and have been using her since she has come out and officially been released. I know a lot of other players have as well. She is a monster. She has got the highest damage coefficient of any tank officer currently in Warpath. That includes exclusive lounge officers. She is just a monster across the board. She does really well on, I've been personally using her on my main battle tank. So if you've got one of those, I would encourage you to put her on that as well. She is just a monster. So for that reason, she is going to be an A or an S tier officer. All right, now we are to the exclusive lounge tank officers. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about them because honestly, for the most part, they're all S tier officers, with the exception of Lord of Order, and that is more of a personal opinion. I view him as more of an A tier officer, just because a lot of his skills, especially his 3 passive skills, you can get those same identical skills from free-to-play officers, so he's just lacking some real value there for me. Professor Payne is a beast in terms of his offensive capabilities and his damage output and his officer skill output. So he is definitely an S tier officer. Again, Lord of Order, an A tier officer for me. He's not a bad officer by any means to have. Is he worth me investing, $2,000, $2,500 in? Absolutely not, at least not at this stage of the game, just because there's too many other good free-to-play options, but he still does hold some value, especially if you've got multiple tank units. Next up is going to be Steel Phoenix. She is just a straight beast. Just read her skills, and you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about, but from start to finish, she is a monster on any tank type you want to put her on, whether you want to run her on a light tank, main battle tank, anything you want to use her on, she's going to play that role extremely well. And then last but not least, we have Wings of Wanderlust. He's got an interesting skill set because he has the ability to force another unit to target him, which has some value for multiple unit types. Honestly, I've seen people throw them on infantry units and run them in and get units to target them and then follow it up with tanks or artillery. I've seen a lot of people do that. Of course, I've seen people do similar things like that. If they're running multiple tanks, they'll run their strongest one in there with Wanderlust on it, and then they'll hit them with the other ones. So there's just a ton of value here to be had with him in multiple different ways and multiple different roles. So he is definitely an S tier officer for me. So that's going to wrap us up for the tank specific officer tier list video. Again, I wanted to get an updated one out to you all. It has been a while since I've done one, so I hope you enjoyed it. If you have stuck around and made it this far into the video, if you've got access to Discord and are not already in our community Discord server, the link to that is going to be in the description of the video. Click on that link. It'll take you right into the community server. Whether you're a new player and have questions, want to learn some more, or if you're a veteran player and just want to come hang out and get to know more people in the community, it doesn't matter. Absolutely everybody is welcome. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch the video, and we'll see you on the next one.